Hello, everybody. Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Joining us today, it is Anthony Treash of Pro Football Focus. We have a lot to get to on the show, so after this video, we'll get to it.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Josh Neighbors here with Anthony Treash of Pro Football Focus. So, Anthony, you've been doing a lot of lists. So we want to thank you first for coming on the show, number one. Number two, kicking off list season, right? Normally in college football, we refer to list season much more. It's like more June, July, right? When we get the early top 25 players to watch. But you have graced us with list season in January with players to look for that are returning in 2022. So thank you for that, first of all, and also thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, of course, man. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, we always like to do it in January as like a little teaser and everything for the upcoming off season. And this year was a little bit more, I'd say different than past years with the transfer portal madness.
Mm-hmm.
You get a few transfers pop up, and it seems like every single position you're getting at least 3 transfers. And then you look at some of these Power 5 programs poaching from the group of 5, some of these top talents. So it's going to be really exciting to see some of these players, make the jump from the group of 5 to the Power 5 in some cases. Yeah, man. So I'm excited going through all these lists. I mean, there's so many. It's my favorite part of the year because you see all these players with so much potential, and you get to see them, take that next step forward. So I'm looking forward to it.
So I have to ask you: Are you a cat? Because you're doing a lot more player evaluation than the majority of people. But that being said, are you a slave to Caleb Williams watch like the rest of us? Are you a Jaxson Dart watch? All this stuff. Are you kind of a slave to it like the general football media? Because I also work in radio and producer for SiriusXM, all of their college channels, and every day it's like any news on Caleb Williams. What is it? Jaxson Dart. What's happening with him? JT Daniels now in the portal. Or are you like, because of kind of the evaluating that I do, I don't really have to be a slave to where is he headed. I kind of have my assessment ready to go when I know he does land somewhere.
Yeah, I kind of do. I am involved with it just a little bit, but it's not something I focus on all the time. It's just mostly to make sure that we have all of our content and everything in our database squared away. As far as making sure we have the right players in the portal and so on, going to the right teams and matching that. But it is a good thing too, just for like looking at like all these lists and putting out top players by position and all of that. And that's why I didn't do a way too early top 25 like everyone else this year, because I was just like it doesn't even make any sense to do it. I mean, we're not even sure where Caleb Williams is going. I mean, in those cases though, I kind of make assumptions. I mean, I'm assuming Caleb Williams is going to USC. I'm assuming Jaxson Dart is going to Ole Miss, and JT Daniels, we'll see where he ends up. I mean, he's run out of options at this point, but I am involved with it just a little bit, just to make sure we have everything squared away and we're on the same path. But but in most cases, is if I hear stuff, to just kind of step back and wait for it to actually happen. And that.
So on the Caleb Williams thing, because this happens in other sports all the time. Whoever the biggest fish is a guy who's talked about the most when it comes to, free agency. I mean, this is very much like free agency. Caleb Williams is that biggest fish out there, so he is getting a bulk of the attention. Basketball, same thing applies. If it's Kevin Durant, if it's Paul George, if it's Kawhi Leonard, whoever it is, we pay the most attention to. Is, in your mind, when you watch Caleb Williams, is he a player that is he like, kind of that promised guy, right? His father's vision for him is being the number one pick. And he's shown flashes where definitely that assessment kind of feels accurate. Is he kind of worth all of this to do? Or is he somebody that you think, well, maybe because he is a really awesome player, awesome talent, but he is the best available, that we're kind of elevating his status?
Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting. And I think this is like a situation where we need to put stuff into like context as far as some of the stuff we put out. So we had Caleb Williams as a number 2 returning quarterback. Now, does that mean he's guaranteed to be a sure thing, right? I mean, like a few years ago, you had Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields 1 and 2. In my eyes, those guys were sure things, right? But, in this case, the only player I'm confident in at the quarterback position is Bryce Young. And I
Yeah,
think
me
he
too.
could even see some regression. With Caleb Williams, he's number 2 just because you got to respect the talent. And Spencer Rattler was number 3 because you still got to respect the talent because those guys are some of the most talented players in college football. But at the end of the day, it's interesting because those two players are very, very similar from a passing perspective. Caleb Williams is obviously better on the ground, but just the way they play the game. I mean, superb arm talent, but they just play so undisciplined. They ignore the check down. They want the big home run downfield all the time. And in Caleb Williams' case, it worked out for him when he was on the field for those first few games, right? Against Texas. I mean, you saw it. But then against Kansas, it kind of came back to bite him. And that's what happens when you have that risky, volatile play style. And so there's a chance where I think his ceiling is higher than anyone else in the country, but his floor, I think, is a lot lower than most people are kind of assuming. And so I think, whatever team ends up getting him, at USC more than likely, I'm not going to go ahead and say, oh, USC is automatically the national contender. I mean, they could be in contention status, but I think it's not so much a guarantee because he still has a lot to improve on. He's ultra talented. It's just kind of putting all those tools together. So, I think I'm going to be interested to see what Caleb Williams and even Spencer Rattler does at South Carolina. Just some of those very, very talented guys. They grade out very well in our grading system. I mean, both guys have an elite PFF grade above 90.0 for their careers, but you see some of the low end. Sometimes it makes you very scary. And what we've seen the last couple of years can take a team out of contention status pretty easily and quickly. So, we'll see what happens. But Caleb Williams, very talented player, not a sure thing. If we're going back and comparing, and even too, like when we're looking at positions, just because one player is, say, wide receiver 3, and then you have a running back that didn't even make the top 10. Well, it's like, well, maybe the running back 11 is more better at his position than that wide receiver 3. It's just positional strength. And this year, I think the quarterback position is, I would say, weak. And when I was building it, I was like, I expect this to change quite a bit, especially with all these moving parts, because it's not so, I mean, especially for these college athletes, right? I mean, we're not talking NFL players, signing with a different team.
Right.
We hear about them changing, schemes and concepts, and it's very difficult to learn that, right off the bat in year 1. I mean, these guys are doing it from college program to the next. So, it'll be, I think a lot of people will be tested, jumping ship, going to another program, not just getting accustomed to the lifestyle, but also just the team as a whole.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's this thought that Lincoln Riley at USC is going to work out, and I mean I think it is, but just because the quarterback follows him there, does it work out for him? Right? That's kind of the thing. Is will it just work out automatically for Caleb Williams? And I think that team has a long way to go. That's why when you think about the idea of Caleb Williams following a Lincoln Riley, it makes a lot of sense. But when you think about it from the perspective of the actual football side of it, like, I think it's a pretty clear argument, in my opinion at least, that Oklahoma is a better situation for a guy like Caleb Williams with, new coach Jeff Lebby coming in there. They probably would retain a couple more of those guys. They probably would have stayed. USC is just, there's so much unknown there. And I think it hits your point of the floor being low. Like, there were a couple games last year, Kansas, a perfect example, especially that first half. Like, no awareness of the fact that Kansas was grinding out the game, low possessions, and he threw a horrible interception that was like mindless. It's like, dude, you get limited possessions. You got to take care of the football. That's kind of the name of the game. Then the Baylor game, I mean, they completely confused him. He had no clue what he was seeing out there, And so he has had those moments. You kind of think going out west is not necessarily a guarantee. I actually, to be honest, almost feel better about Rattler I can't believe I'm saying this, at South Carolina than I do about Caleb Williams at USC, if that sounds too crazy.
No, I'm kind of in the same boat as you are. And, it's a good point with USC. Like, I think, Lincoln Riley's going to turn USC around. I mean,
Right,
USC is
exactly.
going to become a very good program, but this is a complete overhaul, right? Outside of the offensive line's pretty stabilized from what they were last year. But outside of that, every position group's different. They're bringing in a lot of good transfers. Colorado cornerback Mekhi Blackman, I'm pretty high on him. I thought he was a good player for the Buffaloes, and I think he's going to be a good player at USC. But just bringing in all these different players, all these young players too, it's going to be tough, I think, from the get-go. And I think the best case scenario for Caleb Williams is that it's the Pac-12, and you can kind of get away from some,
Right.
from time to time to playing that schoolyard type of ball because it's the lesser of the Power 5 conferences, I think. But Spencer Rattler, South Carolina, I think he's going to be a lot. It's an interesting dynamic that I've never seen before, because we're talking about a guy that he was 15-2 as a starter. Like I said, he still has an elite PF. He's our highest graded quarterback since 2020.
Mm.
I think his arm talent is in the rare category. I can count, name all the names off the top of my head over the last 5 years that, how special it is. And you look at some of the other data, he had the lowest negatively graded throw rate this past season before he got benched. He's still a good quarterback. In South Carolina, they have a pretty decent situation. The offensive line's not as good, but I do think with the offense they're going to run, they're going to make life a little bit easier. Because they have a very good tight end group there with Jaheim Bell and now Austin Stogner coming over with them from Oklahoma. I think they're going to, kind of scheme up the offense and Spencer Rattler's favor to kind of take the stress off the offensive line and make his reads just a little bit easier. And I think the defense is still going to be in pretty good shape as well. So I think he's going to have a pretty good season. And if I had to say which quarterback is going to end up more successful, I'd probably agree with you. I would say it's probably going to be Spencer Rattler at South Carolina. But I think those two, like I said, those two quarterbacks very, very similar. It's just I think that situation at South Carolina is a little bit more stable. So I agree with your point there. That's very good.
Yeah, it's so interesting because and I think this is one of those things where you can't quantify. The pressure is going to be a bit less. That division is not going to be great next year. Unless there's a chance Kentucky's just going to keep reeling off 9-win seasons and this is who they are, which if that's the case, Mark Stoops is a god. He might be. And also just reuniting with Shane Beamer, pretty positive person. And I think that was a big thing for Spencer was it's between the ears. It's pretty clearly between the ears. There's some things he has to clean up. And so, yeah, I think there is a chance that it's a better situation. And also it boosts out. I mean, South Carolina fans, this is the kind of player they think they should be getting. So it kind of feeds their ego, which I think is a really fun, interesting situation. Let's talk about a different quarterback. You got Dillon Gabriel inside your top 10. As you mentioned, hey, maybe it speaks to the class a bit, but also what's crazy about Dillon Gabriel, he's got, I think, 3 years of eligibility left, but he has quite the resume for a guy who's got 3 years of eligibility left. I mean, he's had 2 really impressive seasons. He goes in now to Oklahoma with Jeff Lebby, an offensive coordinator he had a relationship with back from his time at UCF. And I think this becomes a very interesting situation because and the Jaxson Dart part of it, I actually didn't. I understand you want to accumulate talent, right? I think we all get that. But to me, if you've got Gabriel there, that should be the guy. I mean, in terms of proven quarterbacks and proven commodities, I know it's at a lower level in the American Conference. This has been a player who's been pretty good.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I was very confused when I saw Jaxson Dart, and it would look like pretty mutual, pretty serious, and in my head, I was thinking I would take Dillon Gabriel 10 times out of 10. If you say who do you want to start week 1, that's not a slight to Jaxson Dart. He was kind of. I don't think he was as good as a lot of people hyped him up last year at USC.
And he's still only 18, and now he's still only 18 years old.
Exactly, and I think if he goes to Ole Miss, he's going to be in the perfect situation because that's a good offense to kind of get your feet wet and really kind of showcase your talent at a young age. With Dillon Gabriel, though. He was interesting last year just because, and it was a bummer to see him get hurt so early because I wanted to see him in a different offense than what he had his true freshman and sophomore seasons. Because like you said, he had a pretty good resume those 2 years.
Yeah.
And he graded out as a true freshman. I think it was around 80.0. And for true freshman, just looking at some of the grades, if you see the grades, you see a lot of 90s. But if you're a true freshman and you're at around 80, that's rare. That's really, really good. Mm-hmm. And he was there. And then he jumped to that elite level above 90 his true sophomore season. But that offense, Josh Heupel's offense, it's a pretty easy offense. I mean, it made Hendon Hooker. I love Hendon Hooker. I said he should have been the starter for Tennessee over Joe Milton from the get-go.
Yeah, I didn't get that either. That didn't make much sense to me either.
Yeah, but then all of a sudden he had some success, and some people are saying he was like QB7 in this upcoming class before he said he's coming back. I was like, all right, let's pump the brakes. This is the offense. But Dillon Gabriel, he does have the arm talent. He can hit those go balls down the sideline. It was just the reads he had to make were so simplistic. So I was excited to see him in Gus Malzahn's offense. Well, I got to see it for a few weeks, and it really wasn't as high of play as before. But I think kind of reuniting with Jeff Lebby, like you said, I think this offense is going to get back to kind of that simplified version. I think he's going to have success. Now, if we're talking pro potential, I don't think it's
I'm
probably
with
the
you there.
best spot for him, but I think he could be a very, very good college quarterback and lead Oklahoma to success. Which ultimately we're talking about college football. I think it's a good addition for him. I think he's a safe option. He's not going to try to do, like we were talking with, talking about Caleb Williams and Spencer Rattler doing too much. He's not going to try to do too much. He's going to do exactly what's asked of him and make the right decision. So I'm excited to see him. Hopefully he's the starting quarterback for him.
You've mentioned the offense. Now I want to talk about this because there is a, I guess it's a deserved perception around the Baylor style offense and the quarterbacks that it produces, right? You know, it's I'm not going to pretend to fully understand it, but what is it about these offenses, like the ones that Josh Heupel has and that Jeff Levy has, that and I guess Kendall Bryles you could throw in there to some extent too, that don't necessarily produce the best pro prospects?
Yeah, so I mean, like we'll go with Josh Heupel's offense for example. So this is a very spread out approach. They like to get you off guard with tempo, but the biggest thing is that what they like to do is they use those bunch sets and they completely use every inch of the field, and they attack the single high safety. So if they're shown a single high safety and the defense is going to play a single high safety, they're going to get a speed guy out wide, and he's just going to say, "I'm going to beat you down the sideline." And the quarterback's just going to know he sees that single high, he's ripping it towards the sideline. So it's pretty simplistic from a reading perspective. A lot of RPOs in there as well. So you're just you're reading one man there. You pull or you don't. With Baylor this past year, and then why I think Baylor might be a regression candidate for next year. I mean, and why I think Jeff Grimes, I thought he should have won the Broyles Award. It was
Yeah,
a
yeah,
masterful,
yeah.
it's just a play calling perspective from him because he didn't have any talent. I mean, his running back was an off-ball linebacker last year, and then he had one of the best seasons in the Big 12.
Yeah.
His quarterback, no slight to Jerry Bohannon, but he's not
Not
the
great.
best. Yeah, he's not good, but he made him look good, and that's the thing. It's because
And the offensive line last year, too, sorry to cut you off, but the offensive line was, I mean, y'all had them as one of the worst offensive lines in the country the previous year. This year, I think they were top 25.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they were breaking our grading scale, and it was one of those situations where like we need to put this into context. The grades are high, but they're not getting a lot of true pass sets. How many
Right.
one-on-ones, pure passing concepts are they running? And it's very, very slim because they run that wide zone offense. It's the same offense that had Zach Wilson produce at such a high level, made him number 2 overall pick. I mean, they run a lot of wide zone. They run a lot of play action off of that, and he's very good at scheming open receivers downfield for him. And so it was just a very, very friendly offense to everybody, and it was just a good ecosystem involved there. As far one quarterback that kind of jumps out to me, like this past season, that took a big leap, and I was very impressed with the leap because they run a lot of pure passing concepts. Was Desmond Ridder of Cincinnati,
Mm.
and I think that's why Cincinnati had a lot of success and why his deep ball was much improved. He wasn't getting getting the benefit of a lot of play action passes, not a lot of RPOs, not a lot of screens involved. He was actually reading defenses and processing at a high level. And you could see that within his game there, working from the pocket, winning from the pocket downfield. And so that's why when we talk about these college offenses, you look at Sam Howell. That's the biggest knock on him is the offense that he was in under Phil Longo, the offense coordinator for the Tar Heels, because it was just, well, I mean, for starters, the situation was horrible. The offensive line was horrible. He had one receiver, but I mean, it was just a lot of RPOs. I mean, it was most of the time he was playing schoolyard football, just scrambling
Yes.
around everywhere. And so that's like the whole thing. So that's why I always tell people when we're looking at the grades, this is who's the best on their team. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's just because they have the higher grade, they're the better player than someone else. Right. And that's why we had, for example, CJ Stroud, we had him number 4, which is still very good. I mean, I think not enough people kind of understand this. There's 130 starting quarterbacks. We're talking probably, 180 that play multiple games, and you're the 4th best. That's very good. But a lot of people were not happy about that. And it's like, well, we're going to go with the other guys just because his situation it's the best in college football, honestly. I mean, you have 3
Yes.
receivers that sit above the 90th percentile in separation rating in single coverage. I mean, you're having pretty simplistic reads. They kind of pared it back from a little bit. Now, he did make some NFL throws. There's no doubt about it. But, the situation we always have to take account of. And that's why, too, when we do our offensive line rankings, Baylor wasn't number 1, for like Georgia, for example, when we saw it in the SEC title game, right? Because Georgia, they never win an obvious passing situation. They never had to run a lot of pure passing concepts. They could have fun with it. They ran some trick plays. some tight end slip screens here and there, some heavy personnel play action on early downs. And so they're getting a true pass at maybe 30% of the time. And Alabama rolls around the code down, and it's like, okay, we need to start throwing the ball. We need to start to make a comeback. We're running all the obvious passing situations. We're going to be running a lot of pure passing concepts. Well, guess what? These offensive linemen, they haven't seen, these one-on-ones like that. And, Stetson Bennett, who, I thought he should have been started from the get-go. I'm very happy with what he did. He's not an elite quarterback, and he can't really necessarily, process some of the simulated pressures that they're running with him. So,
what do you think about him coming back next year? What do you think about Stetson Bennett returning to Georgia?
Yeah, it's a bold strategy. I could kind of see like the competitive atmosphere of it, but man, he was on top. I mean, the interview with what was it, the US or whatever, the
Good
Today
Morning
Show.
America, I think
Yeah,
it was.
Good Morning America.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're literally on top. You're on top, and it's just I probably would have left it, maybe pursued a GA, maybe try to get into coaching or something. But hey, I mean, he's a competitor, and we saw that this past year, so it's not a surprise to see. Yeah.
One of the best turnarounds in a game I've ever seen. I mean, he was costing them. He was legitimately costing that football game, then turned it around and did pretty well. And also, I mentioned that because, Josh Heupel is really interesting. Everybody loves Hendon Hooker. I went to University of Missouri. I was there when Josh Heupel was there. I was like, it feels gimmicky when you watch it. Like, it really does feel gimmicky. I mean, I remember he had the luxury of having Drew Lock there, but if they played any defense worth a damn, it really never went that well. Now, I think there are some situations where it can work against better, higher tier defenses, you could say. But generally speaking, it felt like when the rubber met the road, there were some issues. Want to ask you just about the NFL draft before we wrap up here. What's kind of your old? Did the pro guys start leaning on you? Say, all right, is it kind of like the actual NFL works, where the people don't understand that these mock drafts, they don't matter that much because there's still a large amount of teams in the playoffs, right? I mean, last week there were, I forget how many, 14 teams. Is that what it is now in the NFL? 14, yeah. 14 in the NFL playoffs. Like, they're all very focused on their own stuff. So this stuff really doesn't matter. Once they get their teeth into it, and that's why, the Senior Bowl's coming up here is huge week usually. But what's your schedule look like? Do you start diving into pro stuff? Do you aid the pro people over there at PFF? What's kind of your NFL draft schedule and season look like?
Yeah, so I mean, we got like you said, the Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, and then the Combine coming up. It's a crazy time for that. But I focus mostly on college, and we have our lead draft analyst, Mike Ritter, who's very good at his job.
Yeah, he's awesome.
And so I kind of help out some of the pro guys from time to time that just focus on the NFL. And just kind of getting a jump start on it, and just and I think that's an exciting thing too, just understanding that most of the time the guys that you see every year that are a 5-star recruit, they're probably going to be a first round pick. I mean, it's pretty correlated there, and just looking at that. And that's why when you get a look on the NFL draft, just letting people know and sharing that these are the guys. So yeah, it is a little bit of that, but yeah, it's like, especially with all these mock drafts, like when I do it, like I don't care about until the NFL season's over. I don't care who the team is picking. Like, I'm just putting the players I think are the best, right?
Right.
Unless it's a quarterback, obviously a quarterback, a team needs a quarterback. It's different, but it's just like, you got a safety going to this team, and it's like, well, it's best player available, and teams don't really matter at this point, right? But it does start to go down, and I never really like to do mock drafts predicting what I think will happen. I pretty much just do what I would do if I were the kind of in the shoes of the GM. And it'll be interesting to see how these quarterbacks shake up, especially with the Senior Bowl. I mean, all of them are going to be
all there, right?
Yeah.
Is Corral there? I know, because I know he was hurt obviously got hurt in the Sugar Bowl. Is he going to be there? Is he going to be there at the Senior Bowl?
That's actually a good question. I'm really not sure about that. He might be the only one.
Oh, he's also not a senior, but I know they have some exceptions sometimes for that. But I saw the video the other day. I'm not sure if you saw the video that Senior Bowl put out, where they have the jerseys on the rack and they were going through all the last names. I was like, oh my God, they've got every quarterback here. I mean, every single guy. So, I mean, I love watching the Senior Bowl practices. To me, are like one of the most fun things to watch. And so I'm thrilled that we get to watch all of those guys. I'm a Washington football fan. I will say, like, Pickett or Corral. I know I talked about the Baylor offenses as being gimmicky and not wanting to go as quarterbacks, but to me, it's those two guys. Just kind of a final thought from you. What do you see the quarterbacks in this class?
Yeah, I just looked it up. Corral won't be there. So yeah, we have those. So I think there's probably I've seen like 6 quarterbacks that have been kind
Mhm.
of mocked and rumored to be maybe a first round pick. 5 of those guys, with Corral not being one of them. If I had to say right now, I'd go Sam Howell, Matt Corral, Desmond Ritter, Malik
Mm.
Willis, Carson Strong,
Not a
and
Kenny
then
Pickett guy, no.
no, I'm not. And, this is kind of, I don't, like last year, I had a firm stance. I was not a Trey Lance guy. I loved Mac Jones when the 49ers trade happened. I was like, everybody's like, are they going to take Mac Jones? And I was just sitting back quiet and I'm watching everybody just complain about it. It's like, I think it'd be a good pick. Yeah. But with Kenny, what concerns me is that he's not a toolsy guy, but he's also in a pit offense, great offensive line, but he's also holding the ball like on average like 3.2 seconds. That's going to have to be 7/10 of a second quicker in the NFL. And like I said, he doesn't really have the tools to make up for it. And I think he made an unprecedented jump. He was one of the best players in college football this past year. With some of the plays that led to it, I think it was just a very good kind of like I said, ecosystem involved.
Mhm.
I think when he has to be a quick processor, I'm a little concerned, and I always hated the hand size debate, but I'm very concerned about with him because whenever he's had to play in the rain, it's almost been horrible every single time, and that's
Mm.
why he has to wear gloves. And so with all of that being considered, I'm just like, I don't think it's really going to work out for him. I think he could be a good backup. I'm not so much an NFL starter. With all those other guys, I think they just have a higher ceiling there. With Sam, I think there's something to be concerned about with every single one of them. Like I
Oh,
said,
yeah.
Sam
Yeah,
Howell,
there's some
that
flaws.
offense. Yeah, Matt Corral, that offense. Desmond Ritter, bouts of inaccuracy. Malik Willis, he's going to be a complete project in rework, but his tools are absolutely absurd. I mean, we want to talk about like Madden type of play with him scrambling around. What he
Right.
did, that
Yeah,
game
the
against
the problem I
UAB.
had with him this year is, the performances were really inconsistent, and that speaks to what you're talking about. I mean, with that kind of schedule, he should be lighting it up every single week, and he wasn't. Um,
Mhm.
it Carson Strong feels like the guy that we always talk about, the one who's going to do the up. He also checks a couple boxes. Big, strong, big arm, white. All the things that people love in quarterbacks. I think he kind of checks all those boxes. Who's your guy? And last thing, I promise to get you out of here on this. Who is the guy that you kind of see with that? Who's got that ability to shoot up the boards? Is it Willis because of his tools? Is it Carson Strong because of his kind of different tool sets, but different abilities? Who's your guy who's going to do the old, uh, you know, moving up the boards?
Yeah, I think Carson, like 15 years ago, Carson Strong probably would go a lot higher than he would now. But I think just the mobility aspect, the dude's not mobile at all. Like he fell apart against Mountain West pass rushes. What's he going to do when he has, Khalil Mack, TJ Watt in his face? I mean, I'd be concerned about that. I think Sam Howell's going to be that guy. I've always had him as the QB1 for me. I think there's a pretty good chance that he could end up the top quarterback. Nothing would surprise me. But I would say if I had to make a prediction, I think he's going to end up being the top quarterback, which I don't think is a consensus view at this point. But I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I think the Senior Bowl week, it shouldn't really matter that much, but it does a lot. And I think that week we're going to get a good tell on who that top guy is going to be.
Yeah, and for everybody who played in the Senior Bowl, they always, especially the guys who are the later round guys, they say how important it is, and I love watching those guys fight it out. All right, Anthony Treash, Pro Football Focus. Where can people find you and your work and all of its variety?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at PFF_Anthony or over at PFF.com. Like those lists we were talking about, we got top 10 players returning at every position, plus a little sleeper to watch for every position, some guy that I think could break out. So you can see all that stuff over at PFF.com.
Anthony Treash, appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.